Hi everyone. Today I'll initially be looking at two interpretations of Nefertiti. The first is the real book transcription, and the second is a transcription by Larry Coryell, which appeared in Guitar Player magazine in his column Contemporary Guitar. I'll then discuss another possible interpretation of this tune. Looking first at the real book example, an initial glance suggests the work may be in the key of A flat major, as it begins with that chord, albeit with a flat 5, and contains here at the end of the initial 8 bars and at the work's conclusion a 2-5 progression in that key. A closer inspection reveals that the second 8 bars begin with an E major 7 chord, suggesting that the work is divided into two 8-bar sections. The first probably begins and ends in A flat, while the second moves to another key but returns to A flat at the end. Attempts to analyse the first 8 bars completely in A flat major produces some anomalies. For example, as mentioned, the initial A flat major chord already contains a flat 5, which typically suggests a Lydian basis. The second chord also, although its root note is part of the key of A flat major, has a suspended note, presumably the 4th, which would give a D flat orientation. The following two chords outline a 2-5 secondary progression in F major or F minor, with this B major chord sounding as the tonic's tritone substitution. F major also has a secondary dominant relationship to this B flat minor 7 chord. Considering only the root notes of these chords then, we could propose the following progression in A flat major, with any chord notes not in this key being explained as alterations or being part of the secondary progression. As already noted, the second 8 bars begin with an E major 7 chord and conclude with a 2-5 progression in A flat major. Taken together, the root notes of the initial 3 chords suggest the dominant and subdominant chords in A major. This A note and the melody notes of the first 2 bars of the second 8-bar section also suggest this key. We could also hear the following E chords as the dominant of A major, which here moves to the dominant of A flat major, whose root note is a tritone away from A. Considering only the root notes of these chords, we could propose the following progression in A and A flat major, with any chord notes not in these keys being explained as alterations. Larry Coryell's transcription essentially follows that of the real book, although he includes these chords and 2 extra melody notes at the tune's conclusion. Many of his chords, which appear to differ from those in the real book, are simply different voicings of the same real book chords. For example, Coryell's initial D minor 7 flat 5 contains the same notes as the real book's A flat major 7 flat 5 chord, but Coryell has chosen to hear it with the D as the root note. Perhaps this is again to emphasize the tritone relationship between the root notes of these chords. Coryell's alternative voicings account for the majority of the notes contained in the equivalent real book chords, and are another example of a reharmonization of a tune. Typically, reharmonization is defined as changing the harmony of a phrase. In other words, in its typical usage, reharmonization swaps a chord or chords from a phrase and inserts other different chords in their place. For example, the tonic chord of a 2-5-1 progression may be swapped for a chord whose root note is a semitone above the original. Here, the G major tonic is reharmonized as an A flat major 7 chord. The doubled root note of the G chord in the melody becomes the major 7th of the reharmonized A flat major 7th. In the Coryell transcription, the reharmonization is effected by taking the same set of notes or most of the notes of the original chord and using a different note of the set as the root note. With both of these transcriptions then, aside from the secondary progression and shift to A major, an overall orientation to A flat is probable. This orientation is due mainly to that key's 2-5 progression concluding each 8-bar section and many of the chord's root notes belonging to that key. However, because each chord contains non-diatonic notes, when soloing, different scales and modes may be selectively used. For example, A flat Lydian may be used over the initial A flat major 7 flat 5 chord, D flat Ionian over D flat sus, and so on. Using as a basis the principles of Coryell's reharmonization produces another possible interpretation in which the first 8 bars are in A-flat mixolydian and the second in E mixolydian, with a return to A-flat mixolydian at the end. This interpretation is based on a number of factors. For example, except for the initial A-flat chord, the remaining chords in the first 8-bar section include a D-flat common note, and except for the initial E major 7 chord beginning the second 8 bars, the remaining chords of that section include either an A or F sharp common note, with some chords containing both. In other words, except for the final chords of these modes, the remaining progressions are united by the common note of their parent scales. D-flat is the parent scale of A-flat mixolydian, and A is the parent scale of E mixolydian. F-sharp, the second section's other common note, is also the root note of A major's relative minor. Another factor is the melody, which except for occasional chromaticism contains the notes of both respective modes. Also, if we reharmonize the chords of the real book transcription, we get the following progressions. The root notes of the central chords of these progressions arpeggiate the notes of the fifth chord of both modes, here E-flat minor and here B minor. As with the earlier transcriptions, a solo taken over this interpretation would require sensitivity to the various chordal alterations. I hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.